What distinguishes leaders from followers in the management of globally dispersed innovation?
In my mind, what distinguishes leaders, I would argue, is being open minded, ability to bring in teams together, diverse teams, on solving complex problems. And third is to create really a culture where your people are open to new ideas. You don't have the not invented here syndrome. And last but not least is your ability to develop the technology, but really learn from what I call post commercialization. Once you deploy the technology, whether it is in China, India, France, the US, every market has its nuances. The companies that are able to learn from those different markets and adapt them to the next generation technology, I think will be very successful. That, I would argue, was distinguishes leaders from followers. There's a great article in the latest issue of Harvard Business Review where Jeff Immelt talks about GE using technology that they developed in India for the market there, which they are now bringing to the US because they had to develop the technology for the Indian market at a relatively inexpensive price because the market could not bear the cost, etc. But they're now able to bring this tomography technology to a lot of the markets in the US to see what we can do to reduce the healthcare costs. So it's a very well written article, I should say.
How will borderless innovation impact the future?
I think, in my mind, we do not have an option because the challenges that we face as a planet regarding energy, the environment, health, I would argue there are very few countries, or very few companies, I should say, that can afford to do all the innovation or the development in technology to solve these problems on a global scale. You cannot do this within your national borders or within your company borders. You have to have multidisciplinary, cross-border, whether you call it geography, whether you call it real or virtual borders, doesn't matter. You have to have that collaboration. Otherwise, I think it'll be very difficult to address some of these problems that face us as a planet.
Can you offer one or two examples that you've been involved in or observed that represent an effective implementation?
One of the examples that I said earlier was the GE example that's very well written in the Harvard Business Review. That would be a very good example, I would argue, that one can think of. Another one would be we have, I just talked about this during the presentation, we are commercializing a technology called Nitrojet, which turns out was developed by a small company in the US. It is basically using high pressure nitrogen to clean surfaces. And a researcher from our lab in France learned about this technology. Next thing you know, he took a flight, came over to the US. We worked with the inventor. We now have reduced that invention to practice. And we are in the process of commercializing this technology under the brand name Nitrojet to clean surfaces, in nuclear plants, for example, using nitrogen. Because in the past, Mike, people used to use water to decontaminate surfaces. So if you think about a nuclear facility, if you're using water to decontaminate the surface, the water gets contaminated, you end up having a big environmental issue, cost to clean that water again. Now you have nitrogen. As you know, air is made from nitrogen and oxygen. Then the high pressure nitrogen cleans the surface and the nitrogen is released to the atmosphere. So environmentally, I would argue, much more friendly approach to cleaning surfaces. So that's a technology that Air Liquide has been involved in very recently.
How can senior decision makers avoid pitfalls while pursuing opportunities from borderless innovation?
The pitfalls, I would think, for a company like ours that has its history in Europe and the US is to not make the assumption that a technology that has been developed in Europe or the US is exactly what the developing world requires. I think to the extent that we can be sensitive to the geographical, cultural needs, if you will, of countries like China and India and make adaptations of our innovations to those marketplaces, I think we'll be very successful. That's another one. Another thing I would think is don't underestimate the people dimension of borderless innovation. Because at the end of the day, we can have all our processes, we can have all our theories. You need that person who feels a sense of belonging, who feels a sense of working for a company that is addressing some of the big issues that face our planet. I think to the extent that you can have that strong link, emotional link, that your company, the company that you're working for, is doing something good, not beyond creating jobs, etc., for the planet, I think is a big plus no matter where you are. I travel quite a bit around the world. I interview a lot of young PhDs who come out of school. No matter where they come from, the questions that they ask me today is very different from what I asked when I got into the working workforce 25 years ago. They're asking me things, Mike, what is your company doing for sustainability? What are you doing to address some of the key issues facing our planet, like energy, like the environment, like healthcare? How are you dealing with those? Why should, give me reasons for why I, as a young PhD, should join your company versus some other company. So these are some of the things that I think we need to keep in mind. Senior management has to keep in mind to make sure that we can provide, we can be an employer of choice, if you will, because there's going to be continued competition for talent as we go forward.